All right. So this is Fang here for GatheringMagic.com, sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. And the series that I'm promoting right now is called Far Wandering, and it's about a Westerner's perspective in Asia, particularly in Japan. And what we have here right now today is an interview with Mr. Ron Foster from Wizards of the Coast. He is the regional coordinator for Japan, is that right?
The Organized Play Territory Manager.
Okay, I'm sorry. Organized Play Territory Manager, there we go. So, as part of this interview, we're having a follow-up interview with Kenji Suzuki, and he's giving us the judge's perspective for the community here in Japan. What I would like to have some input from you is, what do you think, in terms of the Magic players community here in Japan and maybe around Asia as far as you know, how is it different than, let's say, North American or even European Magic in general?
That's actually, it's a very good question, but it's actually a hard one for me to answer because, ironically, I don't know a lot about the North American or the European community. I've lived in Japan for a total of 15 years, and I was living here when Magic first came out. So my experiences as a player before I went to the Wizards of the Coast were all in Japan. So I have only an outsider's view of what the community in North America is like. It was gleaned from the internet.
Okay.
Back when I was a player, we didn't have this newfangled interweb thing that you kids these days have. We had Usenet, and we had mailing lists. So that was how I was able to see into the American community. And at least back then, in 93, 94, it seemed like they were light years ahead of us because the game had come out there. They were in tournaments. People were doing road trips to play in tournaments. Tech was evolving very fast, even at Usenet speed. Decks would get promulgated, then the dojo came out. I started reading people's tournament reports. Right. But I never actually experienced any of that firsthand.
So you're actually giving us more of a unique Japanese experience from your point of view, but not from a Japanese perspective. I guess you could call it a Japanese perspective if you want to.
Right. I was interacting with the community. I knew most of the people that were on the first national team. I know a lot of the famous people from those very early years because I played with them at the McDonald's in Yoyogi, which is no longer there. Well, there is a McDonald's in Yoyogi, but the one we played at is not there. It used to be right out in front of the station, and it was known that if you went there on Tuesday night, people would be playing Magic. And Satoshi Nakamoto was there, Toshiki Tsukamoto was there, Ryutaro Yamaguchi was there, Makami Iwamoto was there.
So McDonald's was the place to be?
It was the place to be. And this was before there were card shops with table spaces to play. This was before there were widespread organized tournaments. This was when Yellow Submarine would only let you buy 5 packs of a given expansion per day.
Wow.
So yeah, very, almost unimaginable for people who've learned how to play since 2000 or 2005. Completely different world.
So you're saying right before the new millennium, then it was just a completely different ballgame. It was very kitchen table-esque, I guess you could call it.
Yeah.
So since the perspective that you have is more uniquely Japanese, and maybe you could kind of gesture at what some of the differences might be from what you know of the latter community.
Well, the Japanese, it's hard to kind of formulate it all and make a coherent timeline of it. Since I was essentially here since the inception of the Japanese community, it's all jumbled up. But I think in terms of broad strokes, one of the biggest differences was the Japanese were much slower, somewhat paradoxically given the stereotypical nature of the Japanese psyche.
Right.
They were slower than the Americans to form communities, to work together. You'd think, it's group mentality, they need teamwork. You'd think they would have...
What you see today, right?
Yeah. But intense rivalry between Tokyo and Osaka.
That's understandable.
So that was one of the big schisms.
Wow.
Tokyoites versus Osakans. But even with the cities, there were cliques, factions. Right? Japanese politics is notorious for having factions.
Right.
society has a bit of a Kabbalistic nature.
Okay.
And so people would share deck ideas or things they've heard about or experiences with their close group of friends, but not with a wider community. So you had all these, it's like silos. You had all these.
You had like little niches everywhere, right?
Right, and people would work on their decks. They played this with each other with their coterie of 4 friends, 5 friends, or whatever, and then there'd be another group over here, about 5 or 10 people, and another one over here, and then they would all bring the same deck to tournaments and do well or not as the metagame was. And kind of funnily, not to like self-aggrandize or anything, I had some other American friends and foreign friends who played Magic, and we were reading all the Usenet stuff and really good dojo in English. So the way we had access to secret tech.
And American tech.
Like I remember I took a slide deck with Orcish Librarian to a tournament at the Shinjuku Hyper Arena, and of course everyone was poo-pooing it, looking at like, what are these ridiculous cards?
Right.
Brass claw horse. And we just like sliced through everybody. Yeah, the original with the brass claw orcs and the brass man and Orcish Librarian.
That's old school.
And all these cards, Death Spark, all these cards that everyone here had just minced out of hand. Necro.
Right.
Stuff like that. We started breaking to tournaments before it clicked. And I won't say, we Americans know it. Japanese lives, good cards, but we were reading the tournament report, like, oh, hey, this slide deck is winning all over America.
Right. That's pretty interesting now, because I would say from a North American perspective, if I was still back in North America, because of the fact that I can read Japanese, I feel like I have sort of that opposite perspective. I read Japanese websites and find the same thing now.
It's kind of the opposite.
Right, like the tables have turned, like maybe 10 years later.
Yeah, and the Japanese, but they learned, I mean, the Americans, from the get-go, even the Americans weren't making teams, but, for very early on, there was team, CMU, there was team, Dead Guy, there were guys in the Midwest, there were the, what was the name of Dan Grace place, the Costa Mesa Women's Center group? Well, that's where Brian Weitzman and Paul Pantera were developing the deck. And, Weissman was the first person to actually try and, at least as far as I can remember, to actually try and formulate, theory of Magic. The ideas of, card advantage and, cards that reach into your opponent's deck and nullify multiple cards, theirs.
Was he the one that realized blue was broken? And we should all
I think everyone kind of realized blue was really, really good, but the deck, right? I mean, it was so powerful, and the theory behind it was so solid that you don't need to explain it or even talk about it. It is the deck. It is still the only deck archetype that is just called the deck. But so yeah, there were teams, there was sharing of information. Eventually the Japanese started to catch on to that. It started in Osaka, actually, with Team Munio. An industrialist named Shibata Munio started a card shop and began to sponsor players. And they had shirts, Team Munio written on it, and he gave them a place to play. And then slowly in Tokyo, some teams started to coalesce, like around Fujita Kenichi. Also, then there was Team John.
So there's a lot more representation from that point on.
Yeah, and that was around like 98, 99.
So they started becoming more of a closer-knit community in that case. In that regard, people started establishing more of a connection with other people, recognizing people.
Yeah, but there was still the Great Wall.
There was the Great Wall in Japan.
Well,
between
no Japanese history.
So what happens? So what happens if you're from Nagoya?
The Nagoyans kind of had their own group because they had Okamoto Jin, they had Nobushita Jun, they had
a lot of all-stars.
Shogun Ryoma. So they had their own good players.
But they were sort of another niche group themselves.
Right, they were they sort of built in the middle, a little bit after the Tokyo and Osaka community started to coalesce. But then, once you get to like maybe around 2003, 2005, finally,
the wall came down.
The Eastern pros and the Western pros started sharing, because they realized they were much stronger together than apart.
The main thing I realized recently, because as you know, I live in Western Japan, in Kansai, as we call it, and one of the first thing that came to mind when you were talking about this divide between East and West was Shuhei Nakamura. So Shuhei Nakamura originally is from Kansai as well. He's from Tirakata, just outside of the city of Osaka. And he traveled he just moved recently, or not recently, earlier this year to Tokyo. And I asked him, I was talking to him a lot about this in depth, and he said because Tokyo's Magic community now is uncomparable with the rest of Japan. Because that's what he thinks now. He thinks that maybe like Western Japan, even though it's reasonably developed in terms of Magic, when you compare it to the amount of shops, the amount of tournaments that are being run every single day of the week in Tokyo, it's just, if you're a pro Magic player and you want to practice and you want to get better, that's the place to be.
Well, 1 in every 10 Japanese lives in Tokyo.
That's true.
And it has the highest concentration of the population, period. So naturally, it has the highest concentration of Magic players, Magic consumers, therefore the largest concentration of shops.
I think the same can be said for talent.
That's an interesting question because mostly because of Team Munio, from the late 90s, probably up to just a few years ago, most of the talent was in Western Japan, the Osaka area, down here, Shimura Kenji, Oiso Masashi. And it seemed like Tokyo's reign was over. In the very early days, like Nakamoto Satoshi, Fujita, Kenichi, Tsukamoto, they were all Tokyoans. And then the pendulum swung over to the east and you started to get Yoshi, and you started to get Nakamoto Shuhei, and Sumura, and Oiso, and
the ones that maybe the younger generation are more familiar with.
Doyama Tsuyoshi, Komiya, Tadayoshi, all national champions, Kuroda,
Kuroda,
Osaka, Higashino, Masayuki. For a long time, the only good Tokyo Magic player was Mori.
Right, Katsuhiro Mori.
And then he eventually moved to Osaka.
Because
all the good pros were in Osaka.
And now it's kind of like...
So maybe Shuhei's right. Maybe
it's
time for the pendulum to swing back.
Right.
Because of that concentration of shops and tournaments being, I don't know. We'll probably have to wait a year or two to see.
That's really interesting. That's really great insight on there. So, what do you think, if you were to look, other than the differences between like maybe Eastern Magic and Western Magic, as we would say, like it's not very PC, but I guess, what do you think, what makes Japan special? Like, what's the reason that, like, a lot of players, let's say, from the Western community, in like terms of North America, look say, like, why do the Japanese have all these innovative deck ideas? Why are they so different? What makes them special then, compared to, like, players who, like, playing at the Star City Games Opens every weekend?
So, I know you're probably familiar with the concept of Tao.
Right. And
over here called Do.
Okay, if you could explain to our viewers.
I was going to. The way. So you hear about like the Tao Ching or like the Shido, Aikido, the way, the path. And it's an Eastern idea of a formalized way of doing something, but also represents like a philosophy of focus and concentration. You can never master the path, but you always try to stay on the path. Everything you do, focus is on the path and comes back to it. So when the Japanese are very, it's a good way to say it, they have like a laser-like focus on whatever it is they want to do. Right. Very good at doing one thing to the point of the exclusion of everything else, and then they become very good at it. So,
like utter perfection.
Right, and then they pursue it even while they know that you can't be perfect. Whether it's like a potter or a calligraphist or a guy who works in a Toyota factory building a car or a shogi, a Japanese chess player, whatever, they're like, I'm going to be the best I can, and I'm going to spend every waking hour thinking about how I can be better. I'm going to analyze my mistakes, I'm going to study, I'm going to look at other people. So when they play Magic, the Japanese play Magic. Right. And so how are they innovative? Especially, they're known for breaking constructed formats.
Right.
How are they innovative? Well, they just play test like crazy. And they're also not afraid to try new ideas, to revisit cards that are bad or weak or crap, like slide deck, right? Like slide deck proves that bad cards can be good. So they'll just throw stuff together, and then they'll play like 100 games, like, all right, yeah, that's not working. All right, let's take these 5 cards out that seem pretty weak, and switch something in. Another 100 games. And that also accounts for the disappearances that we know. Like, awesome careers of Oiso and Kimura and some other people, and then one day they just disappear. I'm like, where'd they go? I thought they were playing Magic and doing great. They're like, yes, they've decided I need to go to school now. So I need to spend all that energy focusing on my entrance exams, the equivalent of the SATs and my boards, so I can get into school. I don't have the luxury. It's like, it's all or nothing.
Right, exactly.
They're either all in or not. Like, I'm not going to try to devote time to Magic because I'll be bad at Magic and then I won't be good at studying. And I'll just fail.
So what you're saying is I actually was talking to Kenji Tsumura about this yesterday during day one. I asked him, how many buys he had. He said, oh, I had one. I'm like, oh, right. Well, what's the reason for that? He's like, I thought you would have three. And he said, oh, I haven't been playing that much recently. My rating's not very high anymore. And I'm like, oh, what's the reason? Oh, well, because I fell off a few years ago because I decided to focus on getting into school and now I'm in school.
And Oiso came back. Like, he won nationals 3 years ago. He did pretty well this tournament. But again, he's not going outside Japan. And he just enjoys playing Magic. So when he has the opportunity to come to Grand Prix, he will. But he's already in school. Kenji Tsumura, he's long made it publicly known that he wants to get a job at Wizards of the Coast. And he was told by various people he needed to speak English and have a college degree. It doesn't necessarily matter what, a college degree.
So now he's going to the Kansai Foreign Language University, which is probably the best one in the area for the purpose of learning English. And actually, the last time I talked to him, I was kind of asking him how his studies were going. He says, I'm playing a lot of Magic Online.
Well, he writes a column for the Japanese
I do know that,
website where he's doing like what Frank Karsten used to do, where he like analyzes the weekly metagame, talks about cool up-and-coming decks and so on. But what's interesting about Kenji, one of the ways he practices English is he tweets in English. And he maintains his connections with the foreign pros he knows through Twitter. It's pretty funny.
That's pretty good. So I just want to summarize. In a nutshell, you would say, I guess, the thing that makes Japanese people and Japanese Magic players very special is that they're very meticulous, you could say, when it comes to, without trying to explain it through the way, but they're very meticulous and they stay focused on what it is that they're doing, whether it's Magic or something else in their life.
And once they've decided that it's time to focus on something else, well, there goes all the extraneous stuff that's not related to that goal.
So they don't juggle, they just do one thing at a time.
There's no jack of all trades in Japan. You just have lots of masters.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, I think that was great. About this GP, what did you think? How did you think it went?
Very happy with results. This is the fourth Grand Prix to be held in Hiroshima. And if you count the national championship, 2 years ago, it's the fifth big event, and up until now, the largest Grand Prix in this area had been about 450 people, and we had almost 800. So obviously, huge success, great growth.
A lot of players from overseas as well.
Yes, and also the judge community, which is something very encouraging because, as you might know, the Korean language edition has been relaunched this year. China's certainly up and coming. We have a lot of judges from those two countries, and what we're hoping is that they can learn a lot from the more experienced Japanese judges, and then they can take that home and spread that through their judge community, share best practices, and make the game better for everybody.
Okay, so I'm not sure if you're allowed to tell us this or not, but I know next year we have Grand Prix Kobe in February. Do you know about any other maybe Asian GPs coming up? I'm not sure if you're allowed to tell me other than what's been on the website.
I'm afraid I can't give any specifics as to what hasn't been announced, but I can tell you that coming pretty soon, in another month or so, we expect to be able to make the announcement regarding the second season Pro Tour and Grand Prix. So you'll just have to wait and see.
Okay. So with the new addition of all these new Grand Prix for next year, do you think it's going to really help the Asian community?
Well, there's certainly going to be more opportunities to play at big events like a Grand Prix, but we're seeing phenomenal growth everywhere. The WPN is expanding on an almost daily basis everywhere. In Japan, we're adding sometimes as many as 10 new stores a week. People are signing up, so there's just more places to play with more people than ever before. So
sounds great. Like, I'm just amazed that like when I came to Japan, there's like maybe 4 or 5 stores just within like a block of each other. And that was just amazing. Like in my city, there's maybe 4 or 5 stores in the entire city. So anyway, so I just want to wrap things up here. Again, this is Sam for GatheringMagic.com, and for my column at Far Wandering, this has been Ron Foster from Wizards of the Coast, and until next time.